Victor Zheng offered the waitress $1 million to serve him in Mandarin, certain she would fail and prove his bitter point about cultural frauds. Her first sentence in flawless Mandarin began the destruction of everything he believed about his own identity. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Some encounters change everything in an instant, like a match struck in a room full of gasoline. For Maya Chun, a 26-year-old server at the Golden Lotus, the most exclusive Chinese restaurant in Manhattan, that match was lit by a man who thought he was untouchable. For Victor Zheng, a self-made billionaire whose name appeared in Forbes more often than his own reflection, it was the moment his carefully constructed world began to crack. She was just trying to make it through another shift. He was just another powerful man used to getting exactly what he wanted. But when he offered her $1 million to serve him in Mandarin, thinking it was an impossible joke at her expense, he had no idea that her response would unravel secrets that 3 families had kept buried for 30 years. This isn't a story about money. This is a story about identity, betrayal, and the dangerous game played by those who think they can buy and sell truth itself. The Golden Lotus wasn't just a restaurant. It was a temple of refined elegance where Manhattan's elite came to see and be seen, where a single dinner could cost more than most people earned in a month. The dining room glowed with warm amber light from paper lanterns that hung like golden moons from the lacquered ceiling. Red silk panels embroidered with dancing dragons lined the walls, and the air carried the delicate perfume of jasmine tea and star anise. Every detail whispered wealth, power, and exclusivity. Maya Chun moved through this world like a ghost, present but invisible. She had worked at the Golden Lotus for 3 years, ever since her mother's medical bills had made finishing her linguistics degree at Columbia an impossible dream. She knew every corner of the restaurant, every preference of the regular patrons, every way to make herself blend into the background. In a place like this, servers were meant to anticipate needs without being noticed, to be perfect and forgettable at the same time. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of night when the restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and the soft clink of expensive chopsticks against imported porcelain. Maya was assigned to the private dining room on the 2nd floor, a space reserved for only the most important guests. Her manager, Mr. Liu, had been unusually nervous all afternoon, adjusting his tie repeatedly and checking his watch every few minutes. When he finally pulled her aside, his expression was strained with barely concealed anxiety. "Victor Zheng is dining with us tonight," he said in Mandarin, his voice low and urgent. "You know who he is, yes?" Maya nodded. Everyone knew who Victor Zheng was. He had built his fortune in tech, starting with nothing and creating a software empire that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. His face was everywhere on magazine covers, business news programs, and billboard advertisements for his latest ventures. He was known for his brilliance, his ruthlessness, and his legendary arrogance. He was also Chinese American, though he spoke publicly about having been raised entirely in America, disconnected from his heritage by choice. "He's bringing important clients," Miss Quarlu continued, switching to Ing. "Everything must be perfect. Flawless service. No mistakes. Understand?" Maya understood. In a restaurant like the Golden Lotus, a single error could mean her job. She needed this job. Without it, her mother's treatments would stop, and the small apartment in Queens they called home would disappear. The private dining room was a masterpiece of understated luxury. A massive round table made of dark rosewood dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs upholstered in crimson silk. Scrolls of Chinese calligraphy hung on the walls, and a small fountain in the corner provided a gentle, meditative sound of flowing water. Maya had set the table herself, placing each piece of silverware and each porcelain dish with meticulous precision. Victor Zheng arrived exactly on time, which somehow felt like a power move in itself. He entered the private dining room with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no, flanked by 3 other men in expensive suits. They were speaking English, their voices loud with a particular brand of arrogance that comes from having too much money and too little accountability. Maya stood by the entrance, her posture perfect, her expression neutral and professional. Victor Zheng was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 40s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they landed on. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, and a watch that glinted gold on his wrist. There was something about his face that struck her as oddly familiar, though she couldn't place why. Perhaps she had just seen his picture so many times in the media that her brain was creating a false sense of recognition. As the men settled into their seats, Maya approached with menus and a practiced smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Golden Lotus. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her English was perfect, accentless, the product of being born and raised in New York City by parents who had wanted her to fit seamlessly into American life. One of Victor's companions, a heavy-set man with silver hair, ordered a bottle of expensive bijou. Another asked for scotch. Victor himself simply waved his hand dismissively. "Whatever's good, you decide." It was a test, Maya realized. He wanted to see if she knew enough about fine liquor to make an appropriate choice for someone of his status. She recommended a rare vintage of Kwaiko Mutai, one of the most expensive bottles in their collection. Victor's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval, but he said nothing. The dinner service began smoothly. Maya brought course after course, each dish a work of culinary art. Delicate soup dumplings that released fragrant broth when bitten, Peking duck with skin like amber glass, lobster prepared in the style of Cantonese masters. She moved efficiently, refilling glasses before they emptied, clearing plates at precisely the right moment, anticipating needs before they were voiced. She was invisible, perfect, exactly what she was supposed to be. The men talked business, their conversation peppered with talk of acquisitions, market share, and competitors crushed beneath their corporate strategies. Victor dominated the conversation, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who believed his own legend. At one point, he told a story about outmaneuvering a rival CEO, his tone dripping with condescension as he described how easily he had destroyed the man's company. His companions laughed, the sycophantic laughter of those who knew their own fortunes depended on staying in his good graces. Maya had heard it all before. In 3 years at the Golden Lotus, she had served countless powerful men like Victor Zhang, men who saw the world as something to be conquered and controlled. She had learned to let their words wash over her, to not let their arrogance touch her. But tonight, something was different. Tonight she felt a simmering anger she couldn't quite explain, a sense that this particular display of wealth and ego was personal somehow. The turning point came during the 7th course, a beautifully presented dish of whole steamed fish in ginger and scallion sauce. As Maya set the dish in the center of the table, Victor looked up at her for what felt like the first time all evening. His gaze was sharp, appraising, and there was something cruel playing at the corners of his mouth. "Tell me something," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the conversation and draw his companion's attention. "You work in a Chinese restaurant. You serve Chinese food. Do you actually speak Chinese, or is this all just performance art?" His tone was mocking, dismissive, as though the very idea was absurd. Maya kept her expression neutral, though her heart rate quickened. "Yes, sir. I speak Mandarin." Victor leaned back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted vulnerable prey. "Really? How convenient." His companions were watching now, sensing entertainment. "Because I've been coming to places like this my whole life, and I've noticed something interesting. All these Chinese restaurants in America hire Chinese-looking servers to create an authentic atmosphere. But half of them can't even order dim sum in their supposed native language. It's marketing. Smoke and mirrors for white people who want to feel cultured." The insult hung in the air. Maya felt her face grow warm, but she maintained her composure. "I assure you, sir, I'm fluent in Mandarin. My parents immigrated from Beijing when I was young." Victor's smile widened. He was enjoying this now, enjoying the discomfort he was creating. "Beijing? How impressive. Well, then I have a proposition for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping at the screen for a moment before turning it to show her. On the display was what appeared to be a banking app showing an account with more zeros than Maya could quickly count. "I'll tell you what," he said, his voice dripping with false generosity. "I'll give you $1 million right now, transferred directly to your account if you can serve me for the rest of this meal entirely in Mandarin. Perfect, fluent Mandarin, not textbook phrases. Real conversation." His companions were grinning now, leaning forward with anticipation. "But here's the catch," Victor continued. "If you make even one mistake, if you stumble on even one word, if I detect even the slightest accent problem, you lose. And you have to admit in front of everyone here that you're a fraud, that this whole Chinese authenticity thing is just a costume you wear for tips." The challenge was cruel, designed to humiliate. Victor was betting that she couldn't do it, that she would either refuse and prove his point about the inauthenticity of Chinese-American service work, or accept and fail, giving him the satisfaction of publicly shaming her. It was a game to him, another way to assert his dominance, to prove that he was smarter and more authentically Chinese than the people who served him. Maya looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment something shifted inside her. She had spent 3 years being invisible, swallowing her pride, accepting disrespect as part of the job. But this man, this arrogant billionaire who mocked her heritage while wearing his own like a trophy, had finally pushed too far. "Very well, sir," she said in English one last time. "I accept your challenge." The moment the words left her lips, Maya felt a strange sense of liberation. For 3 years she had hidden herself, diminished herself, made herself small and unobtrusive to survive in a world that demanded invisibility from people like her. But now, standing before this arrogant man who thought he could buy her humiliation for sport, she felt something else entirely. She felt powerful. Maya turned to Victor Zhang and began speaking in Mandarin, her voice clear and confident, every tone perfect, every syllable precisely placed. "Zhang Shang, I am honored to accept your generous challenge. Please allow me to continue serving you this evening in the language of our ancestors. I hope my humble abilities will meet your distinguished standards." The formality of her speech was deliberate, using the high register of Mandarin reserved for addressing respected elders or important dignitaries. It was the kind of language learned not from textbooks, but from growing up in a household where tradition and respect were woven into every interaction. Victor's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. His companions, none of whom spoke Mandarin, looked between them with confused expressions, suddenly excluded from a conversation happening right in front of them. One of them, the silver-haired man, leaned toward Victor. "What did she say?" Victor waved him off, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. "She accepted. Let's see how long she lasts." Maya moved to the serving station and returned with a fresh pot of tea, the movements of her body as fluid as her speech. As she poured for Victor, she continued speaking in Mandarin. "This is Tiguanyan tea from Fujian province, harvested during the spring season when the leaves are most tender. The name means Iron Goddess of Mercy. It's said that the tea plant was discovered by a poor farmer who prayed to the goddess, Guanyan, for help during a drought. She appeared to him in a dream and showed him where to find this special plant. The tea has a natural orchid fragrance and a sweet aftertaste that lingers like a blessing." She was doing more than just speaking Mandarin. She was demonstrating a depth of cultural knowledge that went far beyond simple fluency. Victor picked up his cup, his expression unreadable. "The tea is acceptable," he replied in Mandarin, though his tone suggested he was determined not to be impressed. "Tell me about the fish." Maya gestured to the whole steamed fish that still sat in the center of the table, its flesh white and delicate, garnished with threads of ginger and scallion. "This is a wild-caught yellow croaker, a fish that was once so prized during the Ming dynasty that only the imperial family was permitted to eat it. The preparation follows the keoju style, steamed to preserve the natural sweetness of the meat, dressed simply so that the quality of the fish speaks for itself. In Chinese culture, we serve the fish whole because cutting it would be like cutting the connection between family. The head and tail must remain intact, symbolizing completeness and abundance. When serving, we present the fish with the head pointing toward the guest of honor." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "That would be you, of course." There was a subtle challenge in her words, a reminder that despite his attempt to humiliate her, she was still the one in control of this interaction, still the one determining how the evening would unfold. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was beginning to understand that he had underestimated her, that this was not going to be the easy victory he had anticipated. For the next 20 minutes, Maya served the remaining courses, each time providing detailed explanations in flawless Mandarin. She described the origin of mapo tofu, telling the story of the poke-marked grandmother who created the dish in Chengdu. She explained the 8 major regional cuisines of China and identified which tradition each dish on their table came from. She quoted poetry from the Tang dynasty about the art of drinking tea. She even made a subtle reference to Confucian principles of hospitality and respect, though her tone suggested she found it ironic to discuss respect with someone who clearly had none for her. Victor's companions grew increasingly uncomfortable with their exclusion from the conversation. The heavy-set man finally interrupted. "Victor, what the hell is going on? Are you two going to speak English or what? We're supposed to be discussing the merger." Victor held up a hand to silence him, his eyes still locked on Maya. "This won't take much longer. Either she'll make a mistake or ... He trailed off, unwilling to admit the possibility that she might actually succeed. In Mandarin, he said to Maya, "You speak well. I'll give you that. Very proper, very textbook. But language isn't just about words. It's about understanding, real understanding. Anyone can memorize phrases and practice tones. Let me ask you something that requires actual thought. What do you think is the greatest tragedy of the Chinese-American experience?" It was a trap, Maya realized. He was trying to get her to make a mistake by forcing her to think quickly, to construct complex thoughts in real time rather than relying on prepared descriptions. He wanted her to stumble, pause, to reveal that her fluency was shallow, but he had miscalculated. This wasn't a difficult topic for Maya. It was her life. She met his gaze steadily and replied in Mandarin without hesitation. "The greatest tragedy is not the loss of language, though that is significant. It's not even the loss of tradition, though that too causes pain. The greatest tragedy is the loss of identity that comes from being told you must choose. You must be either Chinese or American, but never both. We are taught that to succeed in this country, we must erase the parts of ourselves that make others uncomfortable. We must become invisible, blend in, never be too foreign, too loud, too Chinese. And then, when we have successfully erased ourselves, we are mocked by people who look like us, but have chosen a different kind of erasure. We are told we are not Chinese enough, not American enough, not enough of anything except a disappointment to everyone." The words hung in the air like smoke. Victor's face had gone very still. For the first time that evening, his confident mask slipped, and something raw and uncertain flickered in his eyes. Around the table, his companions shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden tension even though they couldn't understand the words being spoken. "That's a very personal answer," Victor said quietly in Mandarin, "almost as if you have something to prove." Maya allowed herself a small, bitter smile. "We all have something to prove, Zhang Xiansheng. The question is whether we're proving it to others or to ourselves." She turned to clear some of the empty plates from the table, giving him a moment to recover his composure. But Victor wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You think you understand me? You think because we both look Chinese, because we both speak Mandarin, that we have something in common? But we don't. I built my fortune from nothing. I clawed my way to the top of an industry that wanted nothing to do with someone like me. I didn't do it by playing the victim or complaining about identity politics. I did it by being better than everyone else, by refusing to let my heritage be an excuse. Maya paused in her work, several plates balanced expertly in her hands. In Mandarin, she responded with a calmness that belied the anger simmering beneath her words. Your heritage wasn't an excuse. It was also not an obstacle you faced alone. You had the luxury of choosing how Chinese you wanted to be, when you wanted to display it, and when you wanted to hide it. And that's not a strength, that's privilege. Some of us don't get to choose. Some of us wear our heritage on our faces every day and face the consequences whether we speak the language or not, whether we embrace the culture or reject it. The directness of her statement clearly surprised him. In Chinese culture, especially when speaking to someone of higher status, such blunt contradiction was considered deeply disrespectful, but Maya was past the point of performing deference. If he wanted authentic Chinese conversation, he was going to get it in all its uncomfortable truth. Before Victor could respond, the door to the private dining room opened and Mr. Liu entered, his expression anxious. He could obviously sense the tension in the room. Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Zhang? Is there anything we can do to improve your experience? Victor didn't take his eyes off Maya. Everything is fine. We're just having a very interesting conversation. In Mandarin, he added, we're testing the depth of your server's cultural knowledge. She's quite impressive. Leo's confusion was evident, but he nodded and backed out of the room, clearly relieved that there wasn't an active complaint to deal with. As the door closed, Victor gestured to Maya to come closer. He pulled out his phone again, opening the banking app he had shown her earlier. You've done well, he admitted, though the words seemed to cost him something. Better than I expected. But we're not finished yet. I want you to tell me something. In Mandarin, explain to me why someone with your obvious education and abilities is working as a server in a restaurant. Don't tell me it's because you love hospitality. I want the real answer. It was another test, but this one was more personal, more invasive. He was trying to find her weakness, the sore spot he could press to make her lose her composure. Maya felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her voice steady. I work here because my mother is dying of cancer. Her treatments are not fully covered by insurance, and someone has to pay the bills that keep her alive. I was studying linguistics at Columbia University, specializing in Mandarin language and classical Chinese literature. I had a full scholarship and a research, but when my mother got sick, I had to choose between finishing my degree and keeping her alive, so I chose her. I chose the only parent I have left in this world. I chose to become invisible, to swallow my pride, to serve people who think I'm beneath them, and I would make that choice again every single day. The raw honesty of her answer seemed to strip something away from the moment. Victor's expression shifted, the cruelty and arrogance draining away, replaced by something more complex. For several long seconds, he said nothing, just stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Finally, he spoke in Mandarin, his voice quieter than before. What was your focus at Columbia? What aspect of classical Chinese literature? The question surprised her with its sincerity. Tang Dynasty poetry, she answered. Specifically the works of Du Fu and Li Bai, examining how their poems reflected the political turmoil of their era and how their different approaches to exile and displacement created two distinct philosophical responses to losing one's place in the world. Victor nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, there was something almost sad in his voice. Li Bai wandered because he chose to. Du Fu wandered because he had no choice. One found freedom and displacement. The other found only loss. He paused. Which one do you think was happier? It was Maya's turn to be surprised. The question revealed a depth of knowledge about classical Chinese literature that seemed at odds with everything else about Victor Zhang. Neither was happy, she replied. But Li Bai was perhaps more honest about his unhappiness. He drank and wrote poetry and pretended the pain was romantic. Du Fu simply wrote the pain as it was, without pretense. I think honesty is worth more than happiness. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. It was the silence of two people who had unexpectedly recognized something in each other, something neither had been looking for. Victor's companions were growing restless. The silver-haired man checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes, while the other two exchanged glances that suggested they were reconsidering their association with someone who would waste an entire business dinner on what appeared to be an elaborate game with the waitstaff. But Victor seemed oblivious to their irritation, his attention entirely focused on Maya. The conversation continued in Mandarin, a private dialogue in a room full of people who couldn't understand a word. It was as if everyone else had simply ceased to exist. Victor asked her about other poets, about historical dynasties, about regional dialects and their differences. With each question, Maya answered with the depth and nuance of someone who had spent years immersed in serious academic study. She didn't just know facts. She understood context, toxins, the living, breathing culture behind the language. At one point, Victor quoted a line from a Tang Dynasty poem, deliberately making a small error in the wording to see if she would catch it. She corrected him immediately. not with triumph, but with the gentle precision of a teacher addressing a capable student who had made an honest mistake. The correction seemed to please him rather than offend him, and Maya realized that beneath all the arrogance and cruelty there was a man who genuinely valued intellectual rigor. The meal was drawing to a close. Dessert had been served, delicate mango pudding garnished with pomelo and accompanied by small cups of chrysanthemum tea. Victor's companions had given up on including him in their conversation and were now discussing business among themselves, occasionally shooting annoyed glances in his direction. He ignored them completely. "You've won," Victor said finally in Mandarin, his voice carrying a note of resignation that Maya hadn't heard before. "You've more than won. You've spoken flawlessly for over an hour. Your Mandarin is better than mine if I'm being honest. Your cultural knowledge is certainly deeper." He pulled out his phone and began tapping at the screen. "What's your bank account information? I'll transfer the money now." Maya felt a strange twist in her chest. She had proven her point, defended her honor, shown this arrogant man that he couldn't simply mock her heritage and get away with it. But now that the moment of victory had arrived, it felt hollow somehow. The $1 million would solve every problem in her life, would pay for her mother's treatments, would allow her to return to Columbia and finish her degree. It would change everything, and yet, she looked at Victor. Zhang really looked at him and saw something she hadn't expected to see. Behind the expensive suit and the cultivated arrogance, behind the carefully constructed image of the self-made billionaire who had conquered the world through pure will, she saw someone lost. Someone who spoke flawless Mandarin but seemed to have forgotten why the language mattered. Someone who could quote Tang Dynasty poetry but had lost the ability to feel what those poems meant. In Mandarin, she said quietly, "I don't want your money." The words hung in the air between them. Victor's finger froze over his phone screen. He looked up at her, his expression one of complete bewilderment. "What?" "I said I don't want your money," Maya repeated, her voice steady. "You offered me $1 million to prove I was authentic, to prove I wasn't a fraud wearing Chinese culture like a costume. But taking your money would make your original premise true. It would turn this into a transaction, a performance for pay. That's not what this is." Victor set his phone down on the table, his eyes narrowing. "Then what is this? What do you want?" "I want you to understand something," Maya said, and for the first time that evening, she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "I want you to understand that when you mock people like me, when you test us and challenge us and make us prove our worth, you're not just being cruel to us, you're being cruel to yourself. You're reinforcing the same system that probably hurt you once upon a time. You've become the very thing you had to fight against." The observation hit its mark. Victor's face went pale, and for a moment he looked not like a powerful CEO, but like a young boy who had just been told a truth he had spent his whole life trying to avoid. Around them, his companions continued their conversation, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake happening in their midst. Before Victor could respond, Maya continued, "You asked me earlier what the greatest tragedy of the Chinese-American experience is. I gave you one answer, but there's another tragedy, perhaps an even greater one. It's what happens when we finally achieve success. We finally make it to the top of the mountain we've been climbing our whole lives. We look around and realize we're completely alone. Cut ourselves off from our own people in the name of success. We've internalized the very prejudices we were fighting against. We've become strangers to ourselves." Victor's voice when he finally spoke was barely above a whisper, still in Mandarin. "How do you know that about me?" "Because I saw it in your eyes the moment you walked in here," Maya replied. "You looked at this restaurant, at the decorations, at me, and I saw contempt. Not the contempt of someone who thinks Chinese culture is inferior, the contempt of someone who's afraid of it, afraid of what it represents, afraid of what it might demand from you if you let yourself feel connected to it." The silence that followed was profound. Victor's companions had finally noticed that something significant was happening, though they still couldn't understand what. The silver-haired man cleared his throat awkwardly. "Victor, are we going to discuss business tonight or not?" Victor held up a hand, silencing him without even looking in his direction. In Mandarin, he said to Maya, "My father spoke to me in Mandarin until I was 7 years old. Then he stopped. He decided that if I was going to succeed in America, I needed to be American. No accent, no divided loyalties, no confusion about who I was supposed to be. He enrolled me in private schools where I was often the only Asian student. He insisted I only speak English at home. When I asked him to teach me Chinese, he told me it was a waste of time, that I should focus on getting ahead, not looking back." Maya felt her heart ache for the young boy he had been, forced to amputate a part of himself in the name of success. "Did you ever learn again?" Victor nodded slowly. "When I was in college, I took Mandarin classes, learned to read and write characters, studied the grammar, practiced the tone. I became fluent technically, but it was different. It wasn't my father's language anymore. It was just another skill I had acquired, another tool in my arsenal. I could speak to Chinese business partners, could impress people at dinners, could use it strategically, but it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like wearing a disguise. That's because language without connection is just noise," Maya said gently. "It's the difference between knowing the words to a song and understanding what the song. Your father thought he was protecting you by cutting you off from your heritage, but what he really did was leave you stranded between two worlds, not quite belonging to either." Victor looked down at his hands, at the expensive watch on his wrist, at the ring he wore that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Everything I built, everything I achieved, it was supposed to prove something. Supposed to prove I didn't need that other part of myself, that I could succeed without it. But you're right, I'm at the top of the mountain and I'm completely alone. The vulnerability in his confession was startled. This was not the arrogant CEO who had walked into the restaurant earlier that evening. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been hiding beneath the armor of success and wealth for so long that he had almost forgotten he existed. Maya made a decision. She moved to the chair beside Victor and sat down, an action that would have been unthinkable for a server under normal circumstances. In Mandarin, she said, "Let me tell you about my mother. When I was growing up, she used to tell me stories about China, about the village where she was born, about my grandparents who I never met because they died before my family came to America. She would describe the landscape, the mountains and rivers, the way the mist would roll through the valleys in the morning. She painted pictures with her words, made me see a place I had never been and would probably never see." She paused, gathering her thoughts. As I got older, I realized something. My mother had created a China that existed only in her memory and in her stories. The real China, the modern China, was something completely different. She was describing a place that was already gone by the time she left it. And yet those stories mattered. They mattered because they gave me a connection to something larger than myself. They gave me roots, even if those roots were planted in imaginary soil. Victor was listening intently, his expression unguarded in a way it hadn't been all evening. "What happened to her? To your mother? She's in the hospital now, dying of pancreatic cancer," Maya said, her voice catching slightly. "She has maybe 6 months left, maybe less. It's every day I go to work, serve people their expensive meals, smile and nod and make myself invisible, and then I go to the hospital and sit with her. She's scared, but she doesn't want me to know she's scared. She tells me more stories, fills the hours with memories and legends and songs she learned as a child. She's trying to give me everything she has left before she runs out of time." "I'm sorry," Victor said, and the words carried genuine emotion. "That's why you left Colombia. That's why you took the job here. That's why I'm still here," Maya corrected. "I could have finished my degree. There were options, loans, deferred payments. But I realized that all the education in the world, all the degrees and accolades, they don't mean anything if you lose the people you love while you're chasing them. My mother gave up everything to come to this country, to give me opportunities she never had. The least I can do is be with her at the end." Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with suppressed emotion. "My father died 3 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. He was 68 years old. We hadn't spoken in almost a year before he died. We had a fight about business, about a decision I made that he disagreed with. I was so angry at him, so determined to prove I didn't need his approval anymore. And then he was gone, and I never got to tell him ... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Maya reached out and placed her hand over his, a gesture of comfort that transcended the professional boundary that was supposed to exist between them. "You never got to tell him you understood why he did what he did, that you forgave him for making you choose between your heritage and your future, that you loved him even though he hurt you." Victor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, his carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. "Yes," he whispered in Mandarin, "all of that, and now it's too late. I have all this success, all this money, all this power, and the one person whose approval I wanted most is gone. I can never go back and make it right." Maya squeezed his hand gently. "You can't change the past, but you can honor it. You can stop running from the parts of yourself that he tried to cut away. You can reclaim what was taken from you, not for him, not for anyone else, for yourself." The moment was interrupted by the silver-haired man standing abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. "Victor, I don't know what's happening here, but we've wasted an entire evening. We came here to discuss the merger, and you've spent the whole night speaking Chinese with the waitress. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving." The other two men exchanged uncomfortable glances and stood as well, gathering their briefcases and coats. Victor barely acknowledged them. He waved his hand dismissively, his eyes still on Maya. "Leave then. The merger can wait. This is more important." The silver-haired man's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "More important? Do you have any idea how much money is on the table? This deal could expand your empire into 3 new markets, and you're throwing it away for what? Some philosophical conversation with restaurant staff?" Victor turned to look at him then, and his voice when he spoke carried the cold authority that had made him one of the most feared businessmen in the country. "The deal will still be there tomorrow. Those markets will still be there tomorrow. But this moment, this conversation, it only happens once. So yes, it's more important. If you can't understand that, then perhaps you're not the kind of partner I need anyway." The 3 men left in a huff, their expensive shoes clicking angrily against the wooden floor. The door closed behind them with a decisive thud, and suddenly the private dining room felt very quiet, very intimate. For the first time all evening, Victor and Maya were alone. Victor let out a long breath, and when he looked at Maya again, there was something like wonder in his expression. "Do you realize what you just cost me? That merger was worth $300 million. Those men were not used to being dismissed, and they're not going to forgive the insult. I may have just destroyed a deal I've been working on for 6 months." Maya felt a stab of guilt and worry. She hadn't meant to cause him problems, hadn't intended for their conversation to spiral into something that would affect his business. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interfere with your dinner. I should have just taken your money and left. I had no right to." Victor shook his head, cutting her off. "Don't apologize. I'm not angry, I'm grateful. You gave me something worth far more than $300 million tonight. You reminded me who I used to be before I became this. He gestured at himself, at the expensive suit and the trappings of wealth. Before I became Victor Zhang, the ruthless CEO. When I was still just Victor, the confused kid, trying to figure out where he belonged. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had been said settling between them. Finally, Victor spoke again, his voice thoughtful. You mentioned you studied Tang Dynasty poetry at Columbia. There's a poem by Li Bai I've always loved. He recited it in Mandarin, his pronunciation perfect, his tone carrying the rhythm of classical Chinese verse. Before my bed, the bright moonlight appears like frost upon the ground. I raise my head to gaze at the mountain moon, then lower it to think of my old home. Maya smiled softly. Quiet Night thought, one of his most famous poems. It's about homesickness, about longing for a place you can never return to. Victor nodded. I used to think it was just about physical distance, about being away from your hometown, but now I understand it's about a different kind of distance, about being separated from yourself, from your own past, from the person you used to be. You can be standing in the very place where you were born and still feel that homesickness, because home isn't a place. It's a sense of belonging, of understanding who you are. That's a beautiful interpretation, Maya said. Most scholars focus on the literal reading, but you're right. Li Bai was always writing about internal landscapes as much as external ones. Victor stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. The city lights glittered below, a constellation of ambition and possibility. I have a question for you, and I want you to answer honestly. If you could go back to Columbia tomorrow, finish your degree, pursue your research, what would you study? What question would you want to answer? Maya thought for a moment, considering the question seriously. I would want to understand how language shapes identity, how the words we speak or don't speak define who we become. I'd want to examine the Chinese diaspora through the lens of linguistic loss and recovery, to understand what happens to people when they're cut off from their linguistic heritage and what it means when they try to reclaim it. So you'd study people like me, Victor said with a slight smile. People who lost their mother tongue and spent their lives trying to find their way back to it. And people like me, Maya added. People who grew up with the language but still feel like outsiders in both cultures. People who are fluent but not native, connected but not rooted. Victor turned back to face her, and there was a new determination in his expression. I want to help you. Not just with money, though. I can certainly provide that. I want to fund your research, set up a fellowship in your name, create a program at Columbia specifically for this kind of work. You shouldn't have to choose between your mother and your education, to be able to have both. Maya felt her heart race. The offer was generous beyond measure, life-changing in ways she could barely comprehend. But there was something about it that made her hesitate, some instinct that warned her that accepting Victor Zhang's money would complicate everything. I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but I can't just accept charity from you. We barely know each other. This isn't charity, Victor insisted. This is investment. You have knowledge and insight that could benefit not just you, but thousands of people struggling with the same question. Your research could change how we think about cultural identity, about what it means to be Chinese American in the modern world. That has value, real value. Let me help you realize it. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen, her face paling as she read the message. It was from the hospital. Your mother's condition has deteriorated. Please come immediately. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the teacup in front of her. I have to go. I'm sorry. I have to go right now. Victor was on his feet instantly. I'll drive you. My car's downstairs. It'll be faster than a cab. You don't have to do that, Maya protested, already moving toward the door. You've already done enough. I can. I'm driving you, Victor said firmly. Don't argue with me about this. They left the private dining room and rushed through the restaurant. Mr. Liu looked up from the host stand, his expression alarmed at seeing Maya leave in the middle of her shift with Victor Zhang close behind her. Maya, where are you going? You can't just leave. Her mother's in the hospital, Victor said sharply. She has an emergency. She's leaving. If you have a problem with that, you can discuss it with me tomorrow. Mr. Liu's protest has died in his throat. He simply nodded, his face going pale, and stepped aside to let them pass. Victor's car was indeed waiting downstairs, a sleek black Mercedes with a driver behind the wheel. Victor yanked open the back door and ushered Maya inside, climbing in after her. Memorial Sloan Kettering, the fastest route, Victor commanded the driver. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, slipping into the night traffic. Maya sat rigid in the leather seat, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She was trying to prepare herself for what she might find when she arrived at the hospital, trying to steel herself for the possibility that this might be the end. But the fear was overwhelming, threatening to crush her completely. Victor took her hand, the gesture simple and comforting. She's going to be okay. You're going to make it in time. You don't know that, Maya whispered, her voice breaking. You can't know that. You're right, I can't. But I know you're strong enough to face whatever comes. I saw that strength tonight. You didn't let me intimidate you or buy you or break you. You stood your ground and demanded to be seen as a whole person, not just a servant or a symbol. That kind of strength doesn't just disappear when things get hard. Maya felt tears streaming down her face now. All the emotion she had been holding back finally breaking through. I'm not strong. I'm terrified. I'm not ready to lose her. I'll never be ready. No one is ever ready, Victor said quietly. When my father died, I wasn't ready either. I kept thinking there would be more time, that I would eventually find the right words to say to him, but time ran out. and I had to live with all the things left unsaid. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. But here's what I learned. Just because the person is gone, the connection remains. Your mother will always be a part of you, in your voice, in your language, in the stories she told you. She'll live on in every word of Mandarin you speak, in every piece of research you do, in every time you help someone else understand their own heritage. The car wove through the Manhattan streets, the city lights streaming past the windows like tears. Maya leaned against Victor's shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. From this unexpected connection that had formed between them over the course of a single extraordinary evening, she thought about her mother, about all the sacrifices Laura Chun had made to give her a better life. She thought about the stories, the language lessons, the careful preservation of culture in a foreign land. She thought about the ring her mother always wore, a simple jade band that had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through generations as a symbol of continuity and connection. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear, a scent Maya had come to know intimately over the past year. She rushed through the automatic doors with Victor close behind, barely registering the curious looks from the night staff at the sight of a waitress in her work uniform accompanied by a man in a $3,000 suit. The elevator ride to the oncology ward felt interminable, each second stretching into an eternity. When they finally reached her mother's room, Maya burst through the door, her heart pounding. Laura Chun lay in the hospital bed, her face pale against the white pillows, but her eyes were open and alert. A nurse was adjusting her and Dr. Morrison, her oncologist, stood nearby with a tablet in his hand. He looked up as Maya entered, his expression serious but not devastated. "Miss Chun, I'm glad you could come so quickly, doctor," Morrison said. "Your mother had a severe episode about an hour ago. Her blood pressure dropped significantly and she was experiencing difficulty breathing. We've stabilized her now, but I wanted you here because we need to discuss the next steps in her treatment." Relief flooded through Maya so intensely that her knees almost buckled. Her mother was alive. She was okay, at least for now. Maya moved to the bedside and took her mother's frail hand. "Mom, you scared me." I know what you thought," Laura said, her voice weak but tinged with her characteristic dry humor. "But I'm not going anywhere yet. I'm too stubborn. Besides, I haven't finished telling you all the stories, doctor." Morrison cleared his throat. "I'll give you a few minutes, and then we should talk about adjusting the treatment protocol." He nodded to Maya and left the room, the nurse following him. Only then did Laura seem to notice Victor, who had remained near the door, unsure of his place in this intimate family moment. Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked from him to Maya with obvious curiosity. "Xiaoling, who is this man? And why does he look like he's been crying?" Maya glanced back at Victor, suddenly aware of how strange this situation must appear. "Mom, this is Victor Zhang. He's a customer from the restaurant. He gave me a ride here when I got your message." She paused, then added in English, "Mr. Zhang, this is my mother, Laura Chun." Victor stepped forward into Maya's surprise. He addressed Laura in perfect Mandarin, using the formal, respectful register appropriate for addressing an elder. "Chun-ai, it is an honor to meet you. Your daughter is an extraordinary woman. She has taught me more in one evening than I have learned in years. I hope my presence here is not an intrusion." Laura's expression shifted, a spark of something sharp and assessing entering her eyes. She studied Victor with an intensity that made Maya uncomfortable. She knew that look. It was the expression her mother wore when she was piecing together a puzzle, connecting dots that no one else could see. "Victor Zhang," Laura repeated slowly in Mandarin, "the technology entrepreneur. I've seen your face in the news. You're the one who built the software empire." She paused, her gaze never leaving his face. "You remind me of someone I knew a very long time ago." Victor looked uncomfortable. "I have a common face. People often say I remind them of someone." "No," Laura insisted, her voice gaining strength. "Not common. Specific." She struggled to sit up more fully, and Maya quickly adjusted the pillows behind her. "What was your father's name?" "Your Chinese name, not the American." The question seemed to catch Victor off guard. "Zhang Weilun," he answered slowly. "Why do you ask?" Laura's breath caught, and her hand tightened around Maya's with surprising strength. "And his father? Your grandfather?" Victor's discomfort was growing more visible. "Zhang Husheng, but I never knew him. He died before I was born." "Again, why are you asking me this?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meaning. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there were tears on her cheeks. "This is not a coincidence. You being at that restaurant tonight, meeting my daughter, coming here, this is not coincidence. This is fate completing a circle that has been open for 30 years. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "Mom, what are you talking about? What circle?" Laura looked at her daughter, then at Victor, and seemed to make a decision. She had been keeping a secret, carrying it like a stone in her heart for decades, and now the moment had come to set it down. "Xiaoling, do you remember the jade ring I always wear? The one I told you belonged to your grandmother?" Maya nodded. "Of course, you never take it off." "I lied about where it came from," Laura said quietly. "It didn't belong to your grandmother. It belonged to a woman named Zhang Meihua. She gave it to me 30 years ago on the day her son was born. She made me promise to keep it safe, keep the story safe, until the right time came to tell it." Victor went very still. "Zhang Meihua was my mother's name. My mother, who died when I was 2 years old. I barely remember her." Laura nodded, fresh tears spilling down her face. "I know. I was there when she died. I was her nurse at the hospital, her friend in the final days. She spoke to me in Mandarin when no one else in the hospital could understand her. She told me things, showed me things, made me swear oaths I have kept until this moment. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of revelation pressing down on all three of them. Maya felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into empty space. Victor's face had gone pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the back of a chair. "What did she tell you?" Victor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What secret did my mother make you keep?" Laura gestured to the small table beside her bed. "In the drawer, there's a wooden box. Bring it to me." Maya opened the drawer and pulled out an old rosewood box, intricately carved with traditional Chinese patterns. She had never seen it before, had no idea her mother kept it here at the hospital. She placed it carefully in Laura's lap. Laura opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were several items: the jade ring Maya had mentioned, a faded photograph, a sealed envelope yellowed with age, and a small red booklet that Maya recognized as a Chinese household registration document. Laura picked up the photograph first and handed it to Victor. Victor took it, his hands trembling. The photograph showed a young Chinese woman, beautiful and smiling, holding an infant. Standing beside her was a man who looked remarkably like Victor, presumably his father, but there was something wrong with the picture. It had been torn, carefully, precisely. There was clearly another person who had been standing on the other side of the woman, but they had been removed, leaving only a fragment of an arm visible. Frame. "This is my mother," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the only picture I have of her with me as a baby. My father kept it in his study, but this copy is intact. My father's copy was already torn when I found it after he died." "Who was cut out of the photograph?" Laura picked up the sealed envelope and held it out to Victor. "Your mother wrote this letter the day before she died. She made me promise to give it to you if you ever came looking for the truth, or if fate brought you to me another way. She said she would know when the time was right, that somehow she would send you to find me. And here you are, brought by my daughter, guided by a challenge about language and culture." Mehua always believed in signs in the old way. She would have seen this as proof that the ancestors were watching. Victor took the envelope with trembling hand. The paper was delicate with age, and his name was written on it in Chinese characters. He looked at Laura, then at Maya, seeking permission or perhaps courage to open it. Maya moved to stand beside him, offering silent support. With careful fingers, Victor broke the seal and pulled out several pages of thin rice paper covered in elegant Chinese calligraphy. He began to read, and as he did, his expression changed from confusion to shock to grief so profound that Maya instinctively reached out to steady him. "What does it say?" Maya asked gently. Victor's voice when he spoke was hollow, broken. "It says that my father was not my only parent, that I had a twin brother, that on the day we were born my father made a choice. He kept me and gave my brother away." The words hung in the air like smoke. Laura nodded slowly, confirming what the letter said. "Your mother was pressured by your father's family. They believed that twins were unlucky, that having two sons born at the same time would divide the family fortune and bring disaster. Your father's parents were very traditional, very superstitious. They demanded that one child be given away, sent to be raised by another family. Your father agreed, chose you to keep, and gave your brother to a distant relative who had moved to a different province." Victor looked like he had been struck. "I have a brother. All this time I have a brother. Your mother never forgave your father for that decision," Laura continued. "It broke her heart. Literally. The doctors said she died of complications from childbirth, but I was there. I saw her fade away from grief. She died of a broken heart, mourning the son she was forced to give away. Before she died, she made me write down everything. The name of the family who took your brother, the province where they lived, every detail she could remember. It's all in the red booklet." Victor picked up the household registration document with shaking hands. He opened it and stared at the pages, at the Chinese characters that spelled out a story he had never known existed. Maya read over his shoulder and saw a name registered: Zhang Wei Jun, twin brother to Zhang Wei Lun, born on the same day in the same hospital, but listed as being sent to live with the Zhang family in Fujian province. "Did you ever try to find him?" Victor asked Laura. "Did my mother ever try to contact him?" "Your mother died when you were both too young to remember her," Laura said sadly, "and your father made it clear that the topic was forbidden. He remarried quickly, tried to erase your mother's memory from the household. I kept the box, kept the documents, kept the promise. I thought perhaps one day you would find your way to me, or your brother would. But years passed and no one came till tonight." Victor sank into the chair beside Laura's bed, the papers clutched in his hands. His entire life had been a lie, or at least an incomplete truth. The loneliness he had always felt, the sense of something missing, now had an explanation. He wasn't just disconnected from his culture, he was disconnected from half of himself, from a brother he had never known existed. The hospital room felt too small to contain the enormity of what had just been revealed. Victor sat motionless, staring at the documents in his hands as if they might disappear if he looked away. Maya watched him, her heart aching for this man who had walked into her restaurant as an arrogant billionaire and was now sitting broken before her, confronted with a truth that shattered everything he thought he knew about himself. Laura Chun's breathing had grown more labored, the effort of telling her long-kept secret taking its toll on her weakened body. Maya noticed and immediately moved to adjust her mother's oxygen levels, her training as a caretaker kicking in automatically. "Mom, you need to rest. This is too much strain." "No." Laura said firmly, her hand reaching out to grasp Victor's arm. There's more. He needs to hear everything before I can rest. She looked at Victor, her eyes intense despite her exhaustion. Your mother made me promise 3 things. First, to keep the documents safe. Second, to tell you the truth if fate brought you to me. And third, to help you find your brother if you chose to search for him. Victor's voice was raw when he finally spoke. Why didn't my father ever tell me? All those years. All the conversations we had, and he never once mentioned that I had a brother. How could he keep something like this from me? Shame, Laura said simply, and fear. Your father was a weak man who let his own parents make his decisions for him. He gave away his son to appease superstition, and then he spent the rest of his life trying to justify that choice by pretending it never happened. When your mother died, he erased every trace of her, every reminder of what he had done. He rebuilt his life, remarried, created a new narrative where he was the strong patriarch who built a successful business through hard work and determination. Acknowledging your brother would have meant acknowledging his greatest failure. Maya knelt beside Victor's chair, her hand on his shoulder. You don't have to process all of this right now. This is overwhelming. You need time to absorb it. But Victor shook his head, and when he looked up at her, there was a fierce determination burning through the tears in his eyes. No, I've spent my entire life feeling like something was missing, like I was incomplete. Now I know why. There's another part of me out there. Another person who shares my blood, my DNA, my history. How can I wait? How can I waste another moment not knowing who he is or where he is or what kind of life he's lived? He turned back to Laura, his voice urgent. You said you would help me find him. Do you know where he is? Is he still in Fujian province? Is he still alive? Laura reached for the rosewood box again and pulled out another envelope, this one more recent, the paper crisp and white. I told you I kept my promise to your mother. I didn't just keep the documents. I searched for him. It took me years and I had to hire private investigators in China, but I found him. Victor's breath caught in his throat. You found him? You know where my brother is? His name is Zhang Wei Jun, but he goes by Wei Jun. He was raised by your father's cousin and his wife in a small town outside Fuzhou. They were good people, loving people who couldn't have children of their own. They raised him well, gave him an education, taught him to be kind. Laura pulled out a recent photograph from the envelope and handed it to Vic. This was taken 6 months ago. The photograph showed a man who could have been Victor's reflection. The resemblance was startling, undeniable. Wei Jun had the same sharp features, the same intense eyes, the same tall, lean build, but there were differences too. Wei Jun's face was softer somehow, his expression open and gentle, where Victor's was guarded and hard. He was dressed simply, in a button-down shirt and slacks, standing in what appeared to be a classroom, surrounded by young students. He's a teacher, Laura explained. He teaches Mandarin and Chinese literature at a high school in Fuzhou. He never married, never had children. He devoted his life to education, to passing on the language and culture to the next generation. She paused, her expression growing sad. He knows he was adopted. His parents told him the truth when he was 8. He knows he has a twin brother somewhere in America. But he was told that his birth family didn't want contact, that the separation was final and complete. Victor stared at the photograph, his fingers tracing the outline of his brother's face. We look so much alike. How did I never know? How did I never feel that something this significant was missing from my life? Maybe you did, Maya said softly. Maybe that's why you've always felt alone, why success never satisfied you, why you pushed everyone away. You were looking for something you didn't even know you'd lost. The door to the hospital room opened and Dr. Morrison entered, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Miss Chun really does need to rest now. Her vitals are becoming unstable and I need to adjust her medications. You can come back in the morning to continue this conversation. Victor stood reluctantly, carefully placing all the documents back in the rosewood box. He looked at Laura with an expression of profound gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for keeping your promise, for protecting this secret, for giving me the chance to know the truth. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You repay me by finding your brother, Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper now. You repay me by becoming whole again, by reclaiming the family that was stolen from you. And you do it quickly because I don't have much time left, and I want to know before I die that I helped complete the circle. Victor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Maya kissed her mother's forehead and whispered in Mandarin, I love you. Rest now. I'll be back first thing in the morning. As they left the hospital room, Maya felt like she was leaving one world and entering another, like the universe had shifted on its axis and nothing would ever be the same again. Outside in the parking lot, Victor's driver was waiting patiently in the Mercedes, but Victor made no move to get into the car. Instead, he turned to Maya, the rosewood box clutched against his chest like a lifeline. I can't do this alone. I need your help. Maya looked at him surprised. My help? What can I possibly do? You speak Mandarin fluently. You understand Chinese culture in a way I never could. You know how to navigate between worlds, how to bridge the gap between Chinese and American identity. Victor's voice was earnest, almost pleading. I'm going to China to find my brother. I'm leaving as soon as I can arrange a flight. Come with me. Help me find him. Help me figure out what to say to him, how to approach him after 30 years of separation. The request was absurd. Maya had a job, responsibilities, a dying mother in the hospital. She couldn't just drop everything and fly to China with a man she had met mere hours ago, no matter how extraordinary those hours had been. And yet, as she looked at Victor's face, at the desperate hope in his eyes, she found herself hesitating. I can't just leave. leave, she said, though the words felt weak even as she spoke them. My mother needs me. My job. Your mother just told you to help me complete the circle, Victor interrupted. And your job at the restaurant. Do you really think that's where you're meant to be? Do you think serving wealthy people overpriced food is the purpose your life is supposed to fulfill? He stepped closer, his voice intense. You told me earlier that you wanted to study how language shapes identity, how people reclaim their heritage. This is that story, living and breathing right in front of you. This is the research you were meant to do. Maya felt torn between practicality and possibility. Everything Victor was saying made sense on some level, but the logistics were overwhelming. I don't have money for a plane ticket to China. I don't have time off work. I can't just... I'll handle everything, Victor said firmly. The plane ticket, the accommodations, everything. And I'll set up a fund for your mother's care, hire private nurses to be with her around the clock while you're gone. She won't be alone and she'll have the best possible care. He pulled out his phone. I can have everything arranged within hours. We could be on a plane by tomorrow evening. The offer was overwhelming, but Maya could see the sincerity in Victor's eyes. This wasn't about money or power or trying to buy her cooperation. This was about a man who had discovered he had been living half a life and was desperate to find the missing piece of himself. And somehow, through the strange alchemy of fate, she had become essential to that quest. Maya took a deep breath, thinking about her conversation with Victor at the restaurant, about identity and heritage and belonging. She thought about her mother's stories, about the importance of completing circles and honoring promises. She thought about the research she had abandoned, the questions she had stopped asking because survival had become more important than understanding, and she realized that Victor was right. This was the story she was meant to tell, the bridge she was meant to build. Okay, she said finally. I'll come with you, but we do this the right way. We don't just show up and disrupt your brother's life. We approach carefully, respectfully. We give him the choice of whether or not to meet you. We honor his life and his decisions. Agreed, Victor said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. We do this together and we do it right. They spent the rest of the night making arrangements. Victor called his assistant and set a series of plans in motion. With the efficiency of someone used to making things happen through sheer force of will, plane tickets were booked on a direct flight to Shanghai with a connection to Fuzhou. Hotel reservations were made. A team of private nurses was hired to care for Laura around the clock. Victor even called Miff Lu at the Golden Lotus and informed him that Maya would be taking an indefinite leave of absence and that any complaints should be directed to Victor's office. Maya went back to her small apartment in Queens to pack, moving through the familiar space in a daze. She pulled out her old suitcase, the one she had used for a college trip to California years ago, and began filling it with clothes. As she packed, she called her mother's hospital room, speaking to one of the nurses Victor had already hired. "How is she?" Maya asked anxiously. "Resting comfortably," the nurse replied. "We're monitoring her closely, doctor. Morrison adjusted her medication and her vitals have stabilized. She was asking for you earlier. Wanted to make sure you were really going." "Tell her I am," Maya said. "Tell her I'm going to help Victor find his brother, and when I come back I'll tell her the whole story. She will be pleased to hear that," the nurse said warmly. The flight to Shanghai was 14 hours of suspended reality. Maya sat in first class for the first time in her life. Surrounded by luxury she had only glimpsed from the other side of a restaurant dining room. The leather seats were impossibly soft, the service impeccable, the meals served on actual china plates with real silverware. But the comfort felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life, playing a role in a story whose ending she couldn't predict. Victor sat across from her in the private pod-like seats, his laptop open but ignored. He had spent the first hour after takeoff staring at the photograph of Wei Jun, memorizing every detail of his brother's face as if he could conjure the man into existence through sheer force of will. Now he was reading and rereading his mother's letter, the delicate rice paper worn soft from his constant handling. Maya had brought her old notebooks from Columbia, the ones filled with research ideas and half-formed theories about language and identity. She tried to focus on them, tried to think of this journey as an academic exercise, a chance to observe in real time the process of cultural reunion and identity reconciliation. But her mind kept drifting to her mother, to the hospital room they had left behind, to the fear that she wouldn't make it back in time. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom in English and then Mandarin, announcing they were beginning their descent into Shanghai. Maya looked out the window at the sprawling metropolis below, the seemingly endless expanse of buildings and lights. This was her parents' homeland, a place she had heard about in stories her entire life but had never seen with her own eyes. She felt a strange mix of excitement and dread, like she was about to step through a door that would close behind her forever. They landed at Shanghai Pudong International Airport as dawn was breaking, the sky turning from black to gray to pink. The airport was enormous, gleaming and modern, filled with Chinese travelers and international business people. Maya felt suddenly self-conscious about her appearance, aware that despite her Chinese face and her fluent Mandarin, she was an outsider here, American in ways that would be immediately obvious to locals. Victor moved through the airport with the confidence of someone who traveled internationally regularly, but Maya noticed he seemed different here, more alert, his eyes taking in everything with an intensity he hadn't shown in New York. They had a 4-hour layover before their connecting flight to Fuzhou, and Victor suggested they leave the airport to see a bit of the city. They took a taxi into Shanghai proper, and Maya pressed her face to the window like a child, drinking in the sight of her ancestral homeland. The city was a study in contrasts. ancient and modern existing side by side. Traditional houses with curved roofs sat in the shadow of glass skyscrapers. Street vendors selling steamed buns set up their carts next to luxury boutiques. Everywhere she looked, she saw the living, breathing complexity of modern China, so different from the static, nostalgic version her mother had preserved in story. Victor directed the driver to take them to Yu Garden, one of the most famous classical gardens in Shanghai. As they walked through the carefully manicured landscapes, past ornate pavilions and koi ponds, Victor finally spoke about what had been weighing on his mind. I keep thinking about my father, about how he lived his entire life with this secret, how he looked me in the eye every day and never once told me the truth. How do you forgive something like that? Maya considered the question carefully. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. Maybe it's more about understanding. Your father made a terrible choice, but he made it in a context we can barely imagine. The pressure from his family, the weight of tradition and superstition, the fear of disappointing his parents. He was weak, but maybe he was also trapped. That doesn't excuse it, Victor said bitterly. Being trapped doesn't give you the right to trap others, to steal their history from them. No, it doesn't, Maya agreed. But understanding why someone did something terrible doesn't mean excusing it. It just means accepting that people are complicated, that they can love us and hurt us at the same time, that they can make unforgivable choices for understandable reasons. They sat on a wooden bench beside a pond, watching the koi swim in lazy circles. A group of elderly Chinese people were practicing Tai Chi nearby, their movements slow and graceful, perfectly synchronized. Maya watched them and thought about the layers of culture she was witnessing, the practices that had survived centuries and were still being performed in the shadow of skyscrapers and modernization. Victor pulled out his phone and showed Maya the information Laura had provided about Wajun. He lives in a modest apartment near the school where he teaches. According to the report Laura's investigator compiled, he's well liked by his students and colleagues. He's quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but he's known for being patient and kind. Every summer he volunteers at a program teaching Mandarin to rural children who might not otherwise have access to quality education. He sounds like a good person, Maya said. Very different from you. The observation hung between them. Not quite an insult, but not quite neutral either. Victor looked at her sharply, then his expression softened into something that might have been shame. You're right. He devoted his life to preserving culture and helping others. I devoted mine to acquiring wealth and crushing competitors. He paused. Do you think he'll even want to know me? When he finds out who I am, what I've become, will he see anything worth connecting with? That's not for me to answer, Maya said gently, but I think you're more than just the ruthless CEO you've pretended to be. I saw that last night at the restaurant. I saw someone who was lost and lonely and desperate to find his way home. Maybe Wei Jun will see that too. They returned to the airport and boarded their flight to Fuzhou. The plane was smaller, more crowded, filled mostly with Chinese passengers returning home from business trips or family visits. Maya noticed that Victor kept looking around at the other passengers, and she realized he was probably wondering if any of them might be related to him, if his brother might have cousins or family friends on this very flight. Fuzhou appeared below them as they descended, a city of mountains and water. Less frenetic than Shanghai, but still modern and bustling. They collected their luggage and took another taxi to their hotel. A mid-range business hotel that Victor had chosen specifically because it was close to the high school where Wei Jun taught. He hadn't wanted to stay in luxury this time, hadn't wanted the barrier of wealth between him and his brother. They checked into their separate room, and Maya immediately collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion from the long journey finally catching up with her. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was racing with thoughts of what would happen next, how they would approach Wei Jun. What words could possibly bridge a 30-year gap? Her phone buzzed with a message from the nurse caring for her mother. Your mother is doing well today. She's asking about you and Mr. Zhang. She wants to know if you've arrived safely. Maya replied quickly, assuring the nurse that they had arrived and would visit the school tomorrow. Then she added, tell my mother I love her, and I'm going to finish what she started. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Victor standing in the hallway looking nervous in a way she hadn't seen before. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by raw vulnerability. I can't do this, he said without preamble. I've been trying to figure out what to say to him, how to introduce myself, and nothing sounds right. How do you tell someone you're the brother they never knew they had? How do you explain 30 years of absence? Maya stepped aside to let him in. He paced the small hotel room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. Maybe we should hire an intermediary, someone who speaks better Mandarin than I do, someone who understands the cultural protocols. Maybe there's a proper way to do this that I don't know about. There's no proper way to do something like this, Maya said firm. There's no protocol for reuniting with a twin brother you didn't know existed. You just have to be honest. You tell him the truth, you show him your mother's letter, and you let him decide how he wants to respond. What if he doesn't want anything to do with me? Victor's voice was small, frightened. What if he's angry that I grew up with privilege while he was given away? If he resents me for having the life that should have been his? Then you accept that, Maya said. You accept that he has every right to his feelings, and you don't try to buy his affection or force a relationship. You give him the truth and the choice, and you respect whatever he decides. Victor stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her, and Maya saw gratitude and fear and hope all warring in his expression. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise, Maya said with a tired smile. I'm just someone who's spent a lot of time thinking about family and identity and what we owe to the people who came before us. My mother is dying, and she's spent her last months making sure I understand where I come from, who I am. She's given me roots, even knowing I'll have to stand alone without her soon. That's what Wei Chun's adoptive parents did for him. They gave him roots. Now you're offering him something different. You're offering in branches, connections, the possibility of growth in new directions. Victor sat down on the edge of the bed, his shoulders sagging. Tomorrow. We'll go to the school tomorrow. You'll help me find the right words. I'll help you, Maya promised, but the words will have to be yours. They spent the evening preparing, rehearsing in Mandarin what Victor might say, how he might approach Wei Jun. Maya coached him on the cultural nuances, the importance of respect and deference when approaching someone older, even by minutes. She helped him think through various scenarios, different ways Wei Jun might react, and how Victor should respond in each case. As night fell over Fuzhou, Victor stood at the window of Maya's hotel room, looking out at the unfamiliar city. Somewhere out there, his brother was probably finishing dinner, grading papers, living an ordinary life with no idea that tomorrow everything would change. Victor thought about his mother, about the promise Laura Chun had kept for 30 years, about the strange series of events that had led him to a restaurant in Manhattan and to the waitress who would help him find his way home. "Thank you," he said quietly without turning around, "for coming with me, for not taking my money at the restaurant, for seeing past the mask I wear, for giving me a chance to be something other than what I've become." Maya came to stand beside him at the window. "You're welcome, but Victor, you need to understand something. Finding your brother won't magically fix everything. It won't erase the loneliness or fill all the empty spaces. It's a beginning, not an ending." "I know," Victor said, "but maybe a beginning is enough." The morning arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Maya woke at dawn to find a message from Victor saying he hadn't slept at all, that he had spent the entire night rehearsing and then abandoning every possible opening line. They met in the hotel lobby at 8 o'clock. Both of them hollow-eyed and nervous. Victor had dressed carefully in simple, modest clothing, a plain button-down shirt and dark slacks. Nothing that would advertise his wealth or status. He carried the rosewood box with him, holding it like a talisman. They took a taxi to Fuzhou No. 3 High School, a sprawling campus of concrete buildings painted in fading yellows and greens, surrounded by metal fencing and gates. Students in matching uniforms streamed through the entrance, chattering and laughing, their voices creating a symphony of youth and energy. Maya and Victor stood across the street, watching the morning routine unfold, neither of them quite ready to take the next step. "He's in there," Victor said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Right now he's probably preparing for his first class, writing characters on the board, arranging his lesson plans. He has no idea that his entire world is about to change." "We can wait," Maya offered. "We can watch, learn his routine, approach him at a better time. There's no rush." But Victor shook his head. "If I wait, I'll lose my courage. If I think about this any longer, I'll convince myself to turn around and go home. It has to be now." They crossed the street and approached the front gate. A security guard stopped them, asking in Mandarin what business they had at the school. Maya explained that they were looking for teacher Zhang Wei Jun, that they had important family information to deliver. The guard looked suspicious but made a phone call to the administrative office. After a brief conversation, he waved them through, pointing toward a building on the left side of the campus. The walk across the courtyard felt endless. Students rushed past them, some glancing curiously at the two well-dressed visitors who clearly didn't belong. Maya could feel Victor trembling beside her, though whether from fear or anticipation she couldn't tell. They reached the administrative building and were directed to the third floor, to the office that Wei Jun shared with two other Mandarin teachers. The door was open. Inside, a small, cramped room was lined with bookshelves overflowing with Chinese literature texts and student paper. 3 desks were crammed into the space, but only one was occupied. A man sat with his back to the door, writing something in a notebook. Maya recognized him immediately from the photograph. The same sharp features, the same build, but seeing him in person was different. The resemblance to Victor was uncanny, almost supernatural. Victor froze in the doorway, unable to speak or move. Maya gently touched his arm, giving him courage, and then stepped forward and knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Excuse me," she said in Mandarin. "We're looking for teacher Zhang Wei Jun." The man turned around, and when he saw them, his expression shifted through confusion to polite curiosity. He stood up, revealing that he was indeed almost exactly the same height as Victor. "Yes, I'm Zhang Wei Jun. How can I help you?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Wei Jun looked from Maya to Victor, and then his eyes widened slightly. He took a step back, his hand reaching for the desk as if to steady himself. The resemblance was impossible to miss, impossible to explain away as coincidence. His voice when he spoke was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Victor found his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. He spoke in Mandarin, the words he and Maya had practiced the night before. "My name's Zheng Wei Lun. I was born in New York City on March 5th, 10th, 30 years ago. I was told my entire life that I was an only child, that my mother died when I was 2 years old, and that my father raised me alone. 3 days ago, I learned that everything I was told was a lie. I learned that I have a twin brother who was given away at birth, sent to live with relatives in Jian province. I learned that my mother died of a broken heart because she was forced to give up one of her sons." Wei Chun's face had gone completely white. He groped for his chair and sat down heavily. his eyes never leaving Victor's face. This isn't possible. This is some kind of mistake or trick. My parents told me I was adopted, that my birth family didn't want contact. They never said anything about a twin. Victor opened the rosewood box with shaking hands and pulled out the letter, photograph, and the household registration document. He placed them on the desk in front of Wei Jun. Our mother left this letter before she died. She gave it to her nurse, a woman named Laura Chun, and made her promise to keep it safe until we found each other. This is proof. This is the truth our father tried to bury. Wei Jun picked up the photograph first, the one showing their mother holding an infant, with their father standing beside her and the mysterious torn edge where another person had been removed. He stared at it for a long moment, then picked up the letter. His hands trembled as he read his mother's elegant calligraphy, tears beginning to stream down his face. When he reached the end, he set the letter down carefully and covered his face with his hands. Maya stood quietly by the door, giving the two men space for their grief. She felt like an intruder on this moment, a witness to something too intimate and profound for outside eyes. But Victor had asked her to be there, and she understood that her presence was important, that she was the bridge that had made this moment possible. Wei Jun finally lowered his hands and looked at Victor with an expression of such raw emotion that Maya felt her own eyes fill with tears. All my life I've felt incomplete, like I was missing something essential but couldn't name what it was. My parents were wonderful. They loved me deeply, but there was always this sense that I belonged somewhere else. To someone else. Now I understand why. Victor moved closer, kneeling beside Wei Chun's chair so they were at eye level. I felt the same way. I've spent 30 years trying to fill an emptiness I couldn't explain. I built an empire, made billions of dollars, achieved everything that's supposed to matter, and none of it helped. I was still alone, still searching for something I'd lost without ever knowing I'd had it. Wei Jun reached out tentatively and touched Victor's face, his fingers tracing the features that mirrored his own. We have the same eyes, he said wonderingly. The same hands. I'm looking at myself, but also at a stranger. How is this possible? How did we lose 30 years? Our father chose to separate us, Victor said, his voice heavy with old anger. He gave you a way to satisfy his parents' superstition, and then he spent the rest of his life pretending you never existed. He stole our mother's joy, our childhood together, our shared history. He took everything from us, but he couldn't take this moment, Wei Jun said quietly. He couldn't prevent us from finding each other eventually. Perhaps our mother knew that. Perhaps that's why she left the letter, why she made sure there was a trail for us to follow. They sat in silence for a moment, just looking at each other, absorbing the reality of each other's existence. Finally, Wei Jun turned to Maya, seeming to notice her properly for the first time. Who are you? How did you come to be part of this story? Maya stepped forward and introduced herself in Mandarin. My name is Maya Chun. My mother was Laura Chun, the nurse who cared for your mother in her final days. She kept the promise she made 30 years ago, and when fate brought Victor to her through me, she gave him the truth. I'm here to help bridge the gap between you, to help you both find the words for what you're feeling. Wei Jun nodded slowly, understanding. You speak beautiful Mandarin. Your tones are perfect. My parents were from Beijing, Maya explained. They raised me to know where I came from, even though I was born in America. They gave me the gift of language and culture. That's what I try to give my students, Wei Jun said, a small, sad smile crossing his face. I try to help them understand that language isn't just words. It's identity, history, connection to something larger than ourselves. He looked back at Victor. Tell me about your life. Tell me everything. I want to know who you are, who you became without. Victor took a deep breath and began to speak. He told Wei Jun about growing up in New York, about his father's pressure to succeed, about learning to hide his Chinese heritage to fit into American society. He spoke about his education, his business empire, his wealth and success. But he also spoke about the loneliness, the isolation, the sense that he was performing a role rather than living an authentic life. He talked about the moment in the restaurant when Maya had challenged him, when she had forced him to confront his own relationship with his heritage. And you, Victor asked when he had finished, what was your life like? Wei Chun's story was simpler but no less profound. He spoke about his adoptive parents, a school teacher and a factory worker who had loved him as their own. He talked about growing up in a modest household where money was tight but affection was abundant. He described discovering literature, falling in love with classical Chinese poetry, deciding to become a teacher so he could share that love with others. He spoke about the satisfaction of watching students' eyes light up when they understood a difficult concept, about the quiet joy of a life dedicated to service rather than ambition. As Wei Jun spoke, Victor listened with an expression that shifted from surprise to envy to something like grief. This man, his genetic twin, had lived the life Victor might have had if their positions had been reversed. Wei Jun had been raised with love and purpose, had found meaning in simple things, had never lost his connection to culture and community. He was everything Victor had spent 30 years trying to become, everything Victor had thought was impossible to achieve. Wei Chun's office mate returned, a young woman carrying a stack of student papers. She stopped abruptly in the doorway when she saw the three of them, her eyes widening at the sight of two nearly identical men sitting across from each other. Wei Jun stood quickly and spoke to her in rapid Mandarin, explaining that he had unexpected family visitors and needed privacy. The woman nodded, her curiosity obvious, and retreated, closing the door behind her. Once they were alone again, Wei Jun turned back to Victor with an expression of uncertainty. I don't know what happens now. I don't know what you expect from me or what kind of relationship you're hoping to build. We're strangers who happen to share DNA. That's biology, not brotherhood." The words were harsh but honest, and Victor flinched as if he'd been struck. "You're right. I have no claim on you, no right to expect anything. I came here because I needed to know you existed, to see your face, to understand the missing piece of myself. But if you want me to leave and never contact you again, I'll respect that." Wei Jun was quiet for a long moment, studying Victor's face with an intensity that made Maya think he was trying to see past the expensive clothes and the cultivated confidence to the vulnerable man beneath. Finally, he spoke. "I don't want you to leave, but I need time to process this. You've had days to prepare for this moment. I've had minutes. Everything I thought I knew about myself has just been turned upside down." "Of course," Victor said quickly. "Take all the time you need. We can stay in Fuzhou as long as necessary. There's no pressure, no timeline." Wei Jun glanced at the clock on the wall. "I have a class in 15 minutes. 100 students expecting me to teach them about the poetry of the Song Dynasty. I can't just cancel. But perhaps you could come to my apartment tonight? We could talk more away from the school." Victor nodded eagerly. "Yes, of course. Whatever works for you." Wei Jun wrote down his address on a piece of paper and handed it to Victor. 7 o'clock. I'll make dinner. It won't be fancy, but it will be home-cooked." He paused and added with a slight smile, "I want to see if we share the same taste in food." That seems like a reasonable place to start understanding each other. As they left the school, Maya noticed that students and teachers were staring at them, whispering to each other. The sight of Wei Chun's doppelganger had clearly caused a stir. Victor seemed oblivious to the attention, walking like a man in a trance, clutching the paper with his brother's address as if it might disappear. Returned to the hotel and Victor retreated to his room. Maya knew he needed time alone to process the meeting, to absorb the reality of his brother's existence. She spent the afternoon exploring Fuzhou, walking through the old streets, observing the rhythm of daily life in this city that was so different from New York. She bought tea from a street vendor and sat in a small park, watching elderly people play xiangqi and young mothers chase toddlers around playground equipment. Her phone rang. It was the nurse caring for her mother. "Ms. Chun, your mother has been asking for you constantly. She wants to know how the meeting. She's very agitated and I think it would help if you could speak." Maya immediately called her mother's hospital room. The moment Laura answered, Maya could hear the weakness in her voice, but also the fierce determination that had defined her mother's entire life. "Xiaoling, tell me, did he find his brother?" "Yes, Mom, we found him. They met this morning. Beautiful and heartbreaking and perfect." Maya found herself crying as she spoke, the emotion she had been holding back all day finally breaking through. "You kept your promise. You brought them together." "Good," Laura said, and Maya could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Good, that's good. Tell Victor that I'm proud of him for having the courage to search. Tell Wei Jun that his mother loved him every day of her short life, that giving him up broke her, but that she never stopped thinking of him." "I will," Maya promised. "Mom, are you okay? The nurse said you were agitated." "I'm dying, child. Of course I'm agitated, but I'm also at peace. I've finished what I started 30 years ago. I've kept my promise to Meihua, now I can rest." Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. "Come home soon. I don't have much time left and I want to see your face again." "I'll be home in a few days," Maya said, her voice break. "I promise. Just hold on a little longer." That evening, Maya and Victor took a taxi to Wei Chun's apartment. It was in a modest building in an older neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other and children played in the courtyard. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to his door, and when Wei Jun answered, he was wearing an apron and smiling. "Welcome to my humble home," he said, ushering them inside. The apartment was small but tidy, filled with books and plants and the lingering smell of cooking. The walls were covered with calligraphy scrolls and photographs of Wei Jun with his adoptive parents and students. It was clearly the home of someone who valued beauty and meaning over material wealth. Wei Jun had prepared a simple but delicious meal: fish braised in soy sauce, stir-fried vegetables, and steamed rice. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in the school office. Wei Jun asked Victor about his business, and Victor found himself explaining, not with pride but with a kind of sheepish embarrassment, how he had built his empire. "It all seems so empty now," Victor admitted. "I spent years chasing success, thinking that if I just made enough money, achieved enough, proved myself enough, I would finally feel whole, but I was wrong. The emptiness just grew larger." Wei Jun nodded thoughtfully. "I think you were trying to fill the space where I should have been. Not me specifically, but family, connection, belonging. You were trying to buy what can only be given freely." The observation was gentle but devastatingly accurate. Victor looked down at his plate, unable to meet his brother's eyes. "You're right. I've wasted so much time, hurt so many people, all because I was trying to fix something I didn't even know was broken." "It's not wasted if you learn from it," Wei Jun said. "Every experience shapes us, even the painful ones. You became who you are because of the path you walked. Now you have the chance to choose a different path." Maya watched the two men as they talked, seeing the way they unconsciously mirrored each other's gestures, the way they tilted their heads at the same angle when thinking, the way they both used their hands to emphasize points. The genetic connection was undeniable, but more than that, She could see the beginnings of something deeper forming between them. They were finding common ground, building a bridge across 30 years of separation. After dinner, Wei Jun brought out a photo album. These are my parents, my adoptive parents. He showed them pictures of a kind-looking couple, the man with a gentle smile and the woman with warm eyes. They died 5 years ago within 6 months of each other. They'd been married for 40 years. When my father died, my mother simply lost the will to live. She said her heart had no reason to keep beating without him. Victor studied the photographs with an expression that was hard to read. They look like good people. I'm glad you had them. They were the best people, Wei Jun said simply. They gave me everything they had. Loved me without reservation. I know I was lucky. Many adopted children grow up wondering if they were wanted, if they were enough. I never doubted that I was loved. Victor's voice was rough when he spoke. I grew up in a mansion with every material advantage, and I spent my entire childhood wondering if I was enough. My father was always disappointed in me, always pushing me to be more, achieve more, prove more. Nothing was ever sufficient. He paused. Maybe he was disappointed because I wasn't you. Maybe he knew what he'd given up and could never forgive himself for it. Or maybe he was just a flawed man who didn't know how to love properly, Wei Jun suggested. Not everything is about us, you know. Sometimes our parents' failures are their own, not a reflection of our inadequacy. The wisdom in Wei Chun's words came from years of teaching, years of helping young people navigate their own insecurities and family complication. Victor absorbed them like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. They talked late into the night, sharing stories, comparing memories, filling in the gaps of each other's histories. Maya watched and occasionally contributed, but mostly she served as witness to the gradual knitting together of two lives that had been artificially severed. At one point, Wei Jun asked Victor why he had offered Maya $1 million to speak Mandarin. Victor explained the challenge, his attempt to humiliate her, his complete miscalculation of who she was and what she represented. I was trying to prove that Chinese Americans like her were frauds, that they wore culture like a costume. I was projecting my own insecurities, my own sense of being a fake Chinese person, onto her. She saw right through me and called me out on it. Wei Jun turned to Maya with obvious respect. You must be quite a remarkable person to have broken through his defenses. Most people just let him be arrogant and terrible. Maya laughed, the first moment of lightness in a heavy day. I couldn't afford to let him be terrible. I was too angry about my own situation, too tired of being invisible, too frustrated with people like him who have everything but appreciate nothing. I pushed back, and somehow that started this whole chain of events. You did more than push back, Victor said quietly. You reminded me that there was a person underneath all my armor. You made me remember that I used to care about poetry and culture and meaning. You started me on the path back to myself. The evening ended with Wei Jun walking them to the door. Before they left, he did something unexpected. He pulled Victor into an embrace, a tight hug that spoke of 30 years of lost connection finally being reclaimed. When they separated, both men had tears in their eyes. Come back tomorrow, Wei Jun said. I want to show you the school, introduce you to my students. I want them to meet my brother. The word came out hesitantly as if he was testing how it felt in his mouth, but once spoken, he smiled. Yes, my brother, that's what you are. Victor could barely speak past the emotion clogging his throat. I'd like that very much. On the taxi ride back to the hotel, Victor stared out the window at the passing city lights, his face reflecting joy and sorrow in equal measure. Maya sat beside him in companionable silence, understanding that sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is simply be present while someone processes life-changing emotions. The next 3 days passed in a blur of revelation and connection. Victor and Wei Jun were inseparable, making up for 30 years of lost time with the urgency of men who understood how fragile and precious such moments were. Wei Jun took Victor to his school and introduced him to his students, who were fascinated by the identical twin brothers and their extraordinary story. Victor sat in on Wei Chun's class, watching his brother teach Tang Dynasty poetry with a passion and grace that made the ancient words come alive for modern teenagers. In those classroom moments, Victor saw what his life might have been, what he might have become if he had chosen meaning over money, connection over conquest. He saw students who looked at Wei Jun with genuine affection and respect, not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because he cared about them as individuals and believed in the importance of what he was teaching them. It was a kind of success that couldn't be measured in dollars or market share, and Victor found himself envying it more than anything he had ever desired in his life of ambition. Wei Jun, in turn, was curious about Victor's world. He asked endless questions about business, about technology, about what it was like to build an empire from nothing, but his questions weren't motivated by envy or desire for wealth. He was trying to understand his brother, to piece together the puzzle of how the same genetic material could produce such different outcomes based on environment and experience. They were a living experiment in nature versus nurture, and both of them were fascinated by the comparison. Maya spent those days exploring Fuzhou, visiting temples and markets, and observing the daily rhythms of Chinese life. She took notes in her old Columbia notebooks, documenting everything she was witnessing. This journey had become the research she had abandoned. The questions about identity and language and belonging made tangible through Victor and Wei Chun's story. She knew that when she returned to New York, she would find a way to complete her degree, to turn this experience into something that could help others understand the complexity of diaspora identity. But as the days passed, the calls from the hospital became more frequent and more urgent. Laura Chun was deteriorating rapidly. The nurses reported that she was sleeping more, eating less, drifting in and out of consciousness. Dr. Morrison called Maya directly to tell her that her mother had perhaps days left, maybe only hours. If Maya wanted to say goodbye, she needed to come home immediately. Maya found Victor at Wei Chun's apartment, the two brothers cooking dinner together, laughing at how they had the same terrible habit of adding too much garlic to everything. When she told them she needed to leave, that her mother was dying, both men immediately shifted into action mode. Victor called his assistant and had a private jet arranged within an hour. Wei Jun insisted on coming with them, saying that he owed Laura Chun a debt that could never be repaid and that he wanted to thank her in person before she died. The flight back to New York was somber. Victor sat with his laptop open, making arrangements. He was setting up the Daniel Owen Pierce Foundation, named for his uncle Daniel Pierce and for Maya's grandfather Owen Calloway, two men who had been wronged by Victor's family and whose stories deserved to be honored. The foundation would fund research into diaspora identity, support programs teaching heritage languages, and provide scholarships for students studying cultural preservation. It was Victor's way of taking the wealth his family had accumulated, questionable means, and redirecting it towards something meaningful. Wei Jun spent the flight reading his mother's letter over and over, memorizing every character, every expression of love and regret that Mei Hua had written in her final hours. He wept quietly, mourning a woman he had never known but who had loved him enough to ensure he would eventually find his way back to his brother. Maya sat between the two men, offering silent support, her own heart heavy with anticipation of the loss that awaited her. They landed in New York at dawn and drove directly to the hospital. Laura Chun was barely conscious when they arrived, her breathing shallow and labored, but when Maya took her hand and spoke her name, Laura's eyes opened. She smiled weakly at her daughter, then her gaze drifted to Victor and Wei Jun standing at the foot of the bed. "You found each other," Laura whispered in Mandarin, her voice so faint they had to lean close to hear her. "You're together. Mei Hua would be so happy. She would be so proud." Wei Jun stepped forward and took Laura's other hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for keeping my mother's secret, for protecting her memory, for making sure I could find my brother. You gave me the greatest gift I could ever receive." Laura's smile widened slightly. "I kept my promise. 30 years, but I kept it." She looked at Maya. "And you, my precious daughter, you were the bridge. You brought them together. You completed the circle." Maya was crying openly now, holding her mother's frail hand to her cheek. "I love you, Mom. Thank you for teaching me who I am, for giving me language and stories and roots. Thank you for everything. I love you too, Xiaoling." Laura's eyes were closing again. "Tell the stories. Remember the language. Pass it on. That's how we live forever, through the words we leave behind." Those were Laura Chun's last words. She slipped into unconsciousness shortly after and died peacefully 2 hours later, surrounded by her daughter and the two brothers whose reunion she had orchestrated. The nurses said it was as if she had been waiting, holding on until she knew her life's work was complete. The funeral was small but meaningful. Victor paid for everything, ensuring that Laura was honored with traditional Chinese customs. Wei Jun stayed in New York for a week, helping Maya through the grief, teaching her the proper rituals for mourning a parent in Chinese culture. The three of them had become a makeshift family, bound together by the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them into each other's lives. After the funeral, Victor made several major announcements. He was stepping back from the day-to-day operations of his company to focus on the foundation. He was using a significant portion of his personal wealth to establish the scholarship fund that would bear Maya's name and her mother's name. And most surprisingly to the business world, he was making his twin brother Wei Jun a full partner in all his ventures, ensuring that the wealth that should have been shared between them from birth would finally be divided equally. Wei Jun was overwhelmed by the gesture but accepted it with the condition that his half of the wealth would be used for education initiatives in China and for programs supporting cultural preservation. He had no interest in luxury or status. He just wanted to continue doing what he had always done, teaching and helping others, but now with resources that could amplify his impact. As for Maya, Victor kept his promise from that first night in the restaurant. He established a full fellowship for her at Columbia, covering not just tuition but living expenses and research funding. The fellowship came with one requirement: that she document and share the story of what had happened, that she turn this extraordinary sequence of events into research that could help others understand the complexity of identity and belonging. 6 months later, Maya stood in Victor's office, the same office where she had first examined the Parisian ledger that proved the existence of 2 rings. She was presenting her research proposal to the board of the foundation, outlining her plan to study language and identity in the Chinese diaspora. Victor and Wei Jun sat side by side in the audience, their resemblance still startling but their differences in demeanor increasingly obvious. Victor had softened, become more thoughtful and less arrogant. Wei Jun had gained confidence, become more comfortable in his new role as someone with resources to create change. After the presentation, the three of them went to the corner where a simple memorial had been placed. It was a photograph of Laura Chun and Mei Hua Zheng, 2 women who had never met but whose lives had intersected in the most profound way possible. Beneath their photographs was a plaque with an inscription in both Chinese and English: "In memory of the Promise Keepers, the Bridge Builders, and the mothers who loved across distance and time. Victor turned to Maya and said in Mandarin, "I came into your restaurant that night thinking I could buy anything, prove anything, conquer anything. I thought I was testing you, but you were testing me, showing me everything I had lost in pursuit of success. You gave me back my humanity, my heritage, and my brother. How do I thank you for that?" Maya smiled, thinking of her mother, thinking of the jade ring that now sat in a place of honor in her apartment, thinking of all the stories and all the words that had brought them to this moment. "You don't thank me. You honor it by living differently, by choosing connection over conquest, by remembering that success without meaning is just noise. You honor it by being the brother Wei Jun deserves and the man your mother hoped you would become." Wei Jun added his own thought. "You honor it by understanding that we're all part of a larger story, that our individual lives are threads in a tapestry woven by those who came before us. My mother kept us connected even after death. Your mother kept her promise across 3 decades. Now it's our turn to keep the promises we make to the next generation." They stood together in comfortable silence. 3 people whose lives had been irrevocably changed by a single evening in a restaurant, by a challenge meant to humiliate that instead became a catalyst for transformation. Victor had found his brother and his humanity. Wei Jun had found the family he didn't know he was missing. And Maya had found her voice, her purpose, and the confidence to claim her place in both worlds she inhabited. The story that began with mockery and a $1 million bet ended with understanding, redemption, and the kind of wealth that can't be measured in currency. It was a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we don't even know we're searching for until we find. That heritage is not something to be ashamed of or to weaponize against others, but something to be embraced, shared, and honored. That family is not just who we're born to, but who we choose to stand beside. And that the most powerful force in the world is not money or status or power, but the simple act of one person seeing another person's humanity and refusing to look away. If this story of identity, heritage, and the extraordinary power of keeping promises moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who understands what it means to live between worlds. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and remember that your story matters.